It was 18 degrees outside when my dad, Richard, opened the back door and told me to get out. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, already muffling the neighborhood in this eerie, white silence. I just stood there in the kitchen, still in my school uniform, and for a second, my brain couldn't quite connect his words to what he was actually saying. Richard didn't raise his voice, but the set of his jaw left no room for doubt. "You heard me, Chloe. Your sister needs proper rest. The basement room isn't suitable for a pregnant woman." He walked to the hall closet, pulled out a rolled-up camping sleeping bag, and practically shoved it into my arms. "You'll be fine for one night. Builds character," he added, as if that explained everything. My mom, Susan, materialized behind him. Her expression, the one I knew meant any argument was futile, was already in place. "Don't be dramatic, Chloe. It's just until we figure out better arrangements. Brittany needs stability right now." My older sister, Brittany, leaned against the doorframe of what had been my bedroom for 14 years, one hand resting on her visibly swollen belly. She didn't even glance my way. At 23, Brittany had always existed in a different universe than mine. Her husband had left her in late November, 2 months into her pregnancy, and she'd moved back home the first week of December. In a matter of days, my own house had started to feel like a place where I was an inconvenience. The basement room they'd referenced was actually a glorified storage area with concrete floors and zero heating. I'd spent the last week shivering down there under 2 thin blankets, watching my breath fog up in the darkness. But apparently, even that wasn't good enough anymore. "Mom," I whispered, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "There's a blizzard warning. They canceled school tomorrow because of the storm." My dad's voice was firm, final. "Fresh air never hurt anyone. Now go on. We'll check on you in the morning." That sleeping bag was rated for 40 degrees. I knew because Mr. Harrison, Maya's dad, had explained the temperature system when I went camping with them last summer. This bag wouldn't protect me from what was coming. The wind was already howling, whipping snow sideways across our yard. I reached for my winter coat, but Richard's hand clamped down on my shoulder. "You won't need that. The sleeping bag is sufficient. Don't want you getting too comfortable out there and thinking this is permanent." Terror seized my chest. "Dad, please. I could get hypothermia." He scoffed. "Stop exaggerating." Then he physically turned me toward the door. "Out. Now." The cold hit me like a physical punch. The wind ripped through my thin school cardigan and uniform skirt. Our backyard stretched maybe 40 feet to a wooden fence, with nothing but open space and our big oak tree for shelter. 6 inches of snow had already piled up, and more was falling every single minute. The back door slammed behind me, and I heard the unmistakable click of the lock. For several seconds, I just stood on the porch, convinced this had to be some twisted lesson, a test they'd end any moment. Richard would open the door, tell me I'd learned about gratitude, and let me back inside. The porch light stayed on, illuminating the swirling snow, but the door remained stubbornly closed. I made my way to the oak tree, my shoes sinking deeper with each step. It offered minimal protection, but its thick trunk blocked some of the worst gusts. My fingers were already going numb as I unrolled the sleeping bag and crawled inside, still fully clothed. The cold penetrated instantly. The bag's thin synthetic filling did almost nothing against the freezing air. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying desperately to preserve body heat. Snow began accumulating on the outside of the bag within minutes. Through our kitchen window, I could see my family. Susan was heating something on the stove. Brittany sat at the table, scrolling on her phone. Richard read his newspaper. Not one of them looked outside. The scene looked so normal, so domestic, that for a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the entire situation. Hours passed. The cold escalated from uncomfortable to painful, then to a strange, frightening numbness that was worse than the pain. My teeth chattered so violently I bit my tongue, and the coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. The wind intensified, driving snow directly into my face whenever I dared to peek out from the sleeping bag. Around midnight, the porch light clicked off. The house went dark, except for Brittany's bedroom light. My bedroom light. I watched her shadow move across the curtains as she settled into my bed, surrounded by my belongings, warm and safe. I must have slept at some point, though it felt more like losing consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, a weak, gray light filtered through the storm. Morning had arrived, but nobody came outside. The snow had piled so high around me that I had to dig my way out of the sleeping bag. My hands were a shocking blue, and my feet. I couldn't feel them at all. The back door remained locked. I knocked, softly at first, then harder. No response. Through the window, I saw Susan making breakfast. She glanced toward the door, saw me, and then simply turned away. The day dragged on with unbearable slowness. I huddled under the tree, the sleeping bag now completely soaked through from melting snow. The storm had intensified, not diminished. The wind chill had to be pushing into negative numbers. I tried to stay awake, remembering something from health class about not sleeping in extreme cold, but exhaustion kept pulling me under. At some point, I stopped shivering. A distant part of my brain recognized this as a bad sign. My thinking had grown fuzzy, disconnected. I kept having these strange thoughts about just lying down in the snow and resting, really resting. The cold didn't hurt anymore. Everything felt distant and soft. Then a car door slammed in our driveway. I registered the sound but couldn't muster the energy to investigate. Voices carried from the front of the house. My dad's irritated tone, and another voice I recognized but couldn't quite place. "Where's Chloe?" The second voice cut through my fog. Uncle David. My mom's younger brother, who I hadn't seen in months. "She's fine inside, doing homework." Richard's answer came too quickly. Her friend's mother called me. Said Chloe wasn't at school yesterday or today. Said she was worried because Chloe had asked to borrow a winter coat last week but wouldn't say why. A long silence followed. Then footsteps, rapid and purposeful. Someone tried the front door, found it locked. More footsteps moving around the house's perimeter. "Chloe?" Uncle David's voice called from the side yard. "Chloe, are you here?" I tried to answer but could only manage a weak sound. My lips had stopped working properly. He appeared around the corner of the house, his face initially confused, then horrified. Jesus Christ. He ran toward me, nearly falling in the deep snow. "Chloe! Chloe, can you hear me?" I nodded, or thought I did. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing while talking to me in a steady stream. "You're okay. I've got you. Ambulance is coming. Stay with me." The back door opened. Richard emerged, followed by Susan. "David, what are you doing?" "She's fine. This is none of your business." Uncle David's expression transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure rage. "You put a child outside in a blizzard. Are you insane?" "She's being dramatic. We were teaching her about responsibility." My mom's voice wavered. "Brittany needs proper care during her pregnancy. Brittany is a grown woman. Chloe is 14 years old." Uncle David pulled off his coat and wrapped it around me. The sudden warmth felt agonizing against my frozen skin. "You locked your daughter outside in 18-degree weather for 2 days during a blizzard." "It wasn't 2 days," Richard's defensive tone emerged. "Just last night and today." Character building. Uncle David's phone remained pressed to his ear. "Yes, I need police and an ambulance. I found a minor who's been left outside in the storm. Signs of severe hypothermia. Parents are present and admitting to the neglect." He rattled off our address. Susan's face drained of color. David, hang up. We can discuss this reasonably. There's nothing to discuss. You nearly killed your daughter. He lifted me carefully, and I realized I couldn't support my own weight. My legs refused to function. The sleeping bag is soaked through. Her lips are blue. She's showing signs of frostbite. Sirens approached in the distance. Brittany appeared at the back door, finally showing some emotion. Mom, what's happening? Your mother and father decided their pregnant adult daughter's comfort mattered more than their minor child's life. Uncle David carried me toward the side yard, away from my parents. They're about to learn consequences. The next few hours blurred together. Paramedics wrapped me in heated blankets and inserted in 4. My body temperature had dropped to 93 degrees. The hospital staff kept using words like serious hypothermia and exposure. Police officers took photographs of the backyard, the soaked sleeping bag, the storm still raging outside. Uncle David never left my side. He answered questions when I couldn't, provided information about my parents, and explained how he'd found me. A detective arrived, a woman named Detective Morales, who asked gentle questions about how long I'd been outside, whether this had happened before, what my home situation was like. I told her everything: the basement room, the progressive removal of my belongings to make space for Brittany's baby items, the way meals had become optional for me while my parents ensured Brittany ate regularly. The comments about me being old enough to fend for myself while Brittany needed family support during her difficult time. Detective Morales's expression grew harder with each detail. She stepped outside to make phone calls. Through the hospital room window, I watched fresh snow continue to fall. The storm had finally peaked, dropping a record 30 inches on our region. 3 days after Uncle David found me, I sat in his guest room, wearing borrowed clothes, my frostbitten toes bandaged and elevated. The doctor had said I'd been maybe 4 hours from the worst when I'd been found. My body had started shutting down, prioritizing vital organs over extremities. I'd lose 1 toe on my left foot, possibly 2. The others would recover with time. Detective Morales arrived mid-afternoon with news. Your parents have been arrested and charged with child endangerment and criminal neglect. Your father faces additional charges for making false statements to police. Your mother is being charged separately for her role in the situation. What about Brittany? I picked at the blanket covering my legs. Your sister claims she didn't know you were outside, so she thought you were staying with a friend. Detective Morales consulted her notes. Given that she was present in the house and never questioned your absence, Children's Services is investigating whether she should face charges as well. At minimum, they're evaluating her fitness for custody of her own child. The thought gave me no satisfaction. I'd spent the past 3 days processing everything that had happened, trying to understand how my parents could have valued me so little. Uncle David had told me I'd be staying with him permanently. He'd already contacted a lawyer about pursuing custody. Your father made bail this morning, Detective Morales continued. He's forbidden from contacting you, and there's a protective order in place. Your mother is still in custody. Her bail hearing is tomorrow. She didn't even check on me, the words came out flat. I saw her look at me through the window and turn away. I know. Detective Morales's professional demeanor softened slightly. I've been doing this job for 12 years. What your parents did ranks among the worst cases of neglect I've encountered. The blizzard conditions, your age, the premeditation. They didn't forget you were out there. They chose to leave you. Uncle David appeared in the doorway. Detective, her parents' lawyer is trying to contact Chloe. I've refused all calls. Good. Maintain that boundary. Detective Morales stood. Chloe, I need to prepare you for something. This is going to become public. The media has already picked up the story, 14-year-old left outside during record blizzard. There will be attention. The news broke that evening. My phone, which Uncle David had retrieved from my parents' house along with my other belongings, exploded with messages. Classmates who'd barely spoken to me suddenly wanted details. Adults from school and the neighborhood expressed shock and support. My story appeared on local news channels, then picked up by national outlets. The narrative focused on the dramatic elements: the blizzard, the sleeping bag, my near-death from hypothermia, Uncle David's rescue. Reporters camped outside my parents' house. Brittany gave one disastrous interview where she claimed the whole situation had been blown out of proportion and that families should be allowed to discipline children without government interference. That interview sealed multiple fates. Children's Services immediately moved to remove her parental rights to her unborn child. The public backlash was swift and brutal. People who might have felt sympathy for a pregnant woman abandoned by her husband now saw her complicit in nearly killing her younger sister. My mother's bail hearing became a media spectacle. Susan appeared in court looking diminished and confused. Her lawyer argued that she'd simply made a terrible mistake in judgment. The prosecutor, Prosecutor Sterling, presented hospital records showing my near-fatal hypothermia, police photographs of the conditions I'd endured, and testimony from neighbors who'd heard my parents explicitly planning to toughen up their younger daughter. Bail was denied. Susan cried, reaching toward the gallery where Richard sat. He looked away. The preliminary hearing happened 6 weeks later. I testified via closed-circuit television from another room, answering questions about the events leading up to that night. My voice stayed steady as I described being locked outside, watching my family eat dinner through the window, the progressive numbness and confusion as hypothermia set in. Defense attorneys tried to paint me as a troubled teenager who'd exaggerated normal parental discipline. The prosecution presented my school records, straight A's, perfect attendance until the week of the incident, glowing teacher recommendations. They showed my medical records documenting the frostbite, the hypothermia, the physical evidence that I'd been hours from the worst. Uncle David testified about the scene he discovered, me semi-conscious under a tree, my parents casually making breakfast while their daughter froze outside. His voice broke when he described how cold my skin had felt, how I hadn't recognized him initially. The defense suggested I could have come inside any time, that the door hadn't really been locked. The prosecution presented the lock itself, which police had removed as evidence. It was a deadbolt, keyless from the outside. There was no way I could have opened it from the backyard. Brittany testified in her own defense, claiming ignorance. The prosecution demolished her story by showing phone records. She texted friends during those 2 days, mentioning how nice it was to finally have her own room, how her parents were taking such good care of her. She posted social media updates from my bedroom, visible in the background. Not once had she asked where I was. The public gallery erupted. The judge threatened to clear the courtroom. Brittany left the stand in tears, her lawyer requesting a recess. During a break, Prosecutor Sterling approached Uncle David and me in the waiting room. They're going to plead. Both your parents and your sister. The evidence is overwhelming, and they know they'll lose at trial. What kind of plea? Uncle David's arm rested protectively around my shoulders. Your father is looking at 6 to 10 years. Your mother 4 to 8. Your sister will likely receive probation and mandatory parenting classes, but she's lost custody rights. The baby will be placed for adoption when it's born. I absorbed this information without feeling. These people had been my family. They'd raised me, supposedly loved me, then they'd thrown me away like garbage when I became inconvenient. The fact that they were facing consequences felt right, but it didn't heal anything. The weeks following the preliminary hearing brought unexpected developments. My parents' case had attracted significant media attention, which meant other people started coming forward. A former neighbor contacted the prosecutor's office with photographs from 2 years earlier, showing me doing yard work in freezing temperatures while Brittany lounged inside. My middle school guidance counselor submitted records of conversations where I'd mentioned being hungry, sleeping in cold rooms, and feeling like I didn't matter at home. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture. This hadn't been one terrible decision during a stressful time. The neglect had been building for years, accelerating after Brittany's return home. I'd simply been too young, too isolated, and too conditioned to their treatment to recognize it as abuse. Uncle David's lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, worked on securing permanent custody while simultaneously helping me understand my rights regarding any inheritance or family assets. Turns out my parents had a college fund they'd established when I was born, $30,000 meant for my education. After Brittany moved home, they'd withdrawn $25,000 to renovate the basement into an apartment for her and the baby. They can't do that, Ms. Albright explained during one of our meetings. That fund was designated specifically for you. We're filing to have the full amount restored, plus damages. I sat in her office, still processing. They spent my college money on Brittany without your consent or knowledge? Yes, she made notes on her legal pad. Given their criminal convictions, we have solid grounds for a civil suit. They'll likely be ordered to repay the full amount, plus interest and penalties. The thought of my parents owing me money felt surreal. I didn't want their money. I wanted them to have been different people. Parents who'd valued me, protected me, chosen me. But that wasn't reality. And Ms. Albright was right. I deserved compensation for what they'd stolen. Uncle David took me to physical therapy twice a week for my feet. The frostbite damage meant I'd need special orthotics for the rest of my life, and my balance had been affected by losing the toes. The therapist, a patient man named Mr. Chen, worked with me on rebuilding strength and adapting my gait. "You're doing excellent work," he told me during one session. "Most patients with this level of injury struggle much more with acceptance. You're facing it head-on." I didn't feel brave. I felt angry most days, grieving on others, numb when neither anger nor sadness had energy left. My therapist, Dr. Lee, helped me understand that all those feelings could coexist, that healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd take steps backward and that was perfectly normal. School became my escape in unexpected ways. My English teacher, Ms. Davies, suggested I join the creative writing club. Writing gave me an outlet for processing everything without having to speak it aloud. I wrote stories about survival, about betrayal, about finding family in unexpected places. Some weeks I filled entire notebooks. My friend group shifted dramatically. People I considered close friends before the incident revealed themselves to be more interested in drama than genuine support. But new friendships emerged with people who respected my boundaries, who didn't push for details, who just wanted to hang out and talk about normal teenage things. Maya, who sat next to me in chemistry, became one of my closest friends. She'd moved to our school district that January and knew me only as I was now, not as the girl from the Blizzard story. We bonded over terrible science puns and a shared love of mystery novels. She knew my history because everyone did, but she never made it the centerpiece of our friendship. "Want to come over Saturday?" she asked one afternoon in March. "My mom's making her famous lasagna, and we're having a movie marathon." The invitation triggered unexpected anxiety. Going to someone else's home, meeting their family, watching them interact. What if it hurt too much? What if seeing normal family dynamics reminded me of everything I'd lost? But I went anyway. Maya's house was chaotic in the best way. Her younger brothers argued over video games while her mom cooked and sang along to music. Her dad told terrible jokes that everyone groaned at but secretly loved. They welcomed me without fanfare, treating me like I'd always been part of their circle. During dinner, Maya's mom mentioned she'd heard about my case on the news. My stomach clenched, waiting for the probing questions or inappropriate sympathy. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said simply. "I'm glad you're safe now. Would you like more lasagna?" That was it. Acknowledgement without spectacle. Compassion without intrusion. I ate 3 helpings of lasagna, laughed at Maya's dad's puns, and felt for the first time in months like a regular teenager. The civil lawsuit moved forward while the criminal case headed toward plea agreements. My parents' assets were frozen pending the outcome. The house they'd lived in for 20 years would likely be sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Brittany had already been evicted from their home. She couldn't afford to maintain it, and the court refused to let her stay in a property that would be liquidated. She tried contacting me once, showing up at my school during lunch. Security intercepted her before she reached me, but I saw her from across the parking lot. She looked smaller, somehow, diminished. Her pregnancy had progressed visibly. She held a letter she'd apparently wanted to deliver personally. The school principal, Principal Thompson, brought me the letter afterward. "You don't have to read it. I can dispose of it if you prefer." I took it, but didn't open it for 3 days. When I finally did, late at night in my room at Uncle David's house, the content stunned me with its tone deafness. Brittany had written about how difficult her life had become since everything happened. She mentioned losing her apartment, working at a fast food restaurant, facing judgment everywhere she went. She talked about how her advanced pregnancy made everything harder, how she couldn't believe things had escalated so far. Not once did she apologize. Not once did she acknowledge that I'd nearly perished. The letter centered entirely on her suffering, her challenges, her victimhood. She ended by saying she hoped we could move past this once emotions settled down. I showed the letter to Dr. Lee during our next session. She read it carefully, her professional mask slipping briefly into obvious disgust. "How does reading this make you feel?" she asked. Like she still doesn't understand what she did, what they all did. I twisted my hands together. She thinks this is about emotions, about drama, not about the fact that she watched them lock me outside and never questioned it. "Your sister's letter demonstrates a profound lack of insight and empathy." Dr. Lee set the letter aside. "She's reframed herself as the victim of circumstances rather than an active participant in your mistreatment. That's a defense mechanism, but it's also deeply unfair to you." I didn't respond to Brittany's letter. Ms. Albright advised against any contact that wasn't court-ordered. Uncle David filed the letter with the rest of the documentation, more evidence of the family dynamics that had nearly cost me my life. Spring brought my 15th birthday. Uncle David asked how I wanted to celebrate, if I wanted to celebrate at all. The last birthday I'd had at my parents' house had been forgotten entirely. They'd been too focused on preparing for Brittany's baby to remember I'd turned 14. "Something small," I suggested. "Maybe just dinner with you and a couple friends." He organized a perfect low-key celebration. Maya came over along with 2 other friends from school. We ordered pizza, watched movies, and Uncle David presented me with a cake he baked himself. It leaned slightly to one side, and the frosting was uneven, but he tried. That effort meant everything. "Make a wish," Maya encouraged as I faced the candles. I closed my eyes and wished for what I'd been wishing for months: peace. Not forgetting, not even forgiving, but peace with what had happened and who I was becoming in its aftermath. The criminal plea agreements were finalized in April. Both my parents accepted deals rather than face trial. The prosecution had built such an overwhelming case that their lawyers advised against gambling on a jury's sympathy. During one of the final court appearances before sentencing, I saw my father's parents, Grandma Carol and Grandpa Robert, for the first time since the incident. They sat in the back row looking devastated. Afterward, they approached Uncle David in the hallway. "We didn't know," Grandma Carol said, tears streaming down her face. "We had no idea they were treating Chloe this way." "If we'd known, you would have done what?" Uncle David's voice stayed level but firm. "Your son nearly took his daughter's life. Your daughter-in-law participated. You may not have known the specifics, but did you never question why Chloe stopped coming to family gatherings? Why she looked thin and tired when you did see her?" Grandpa Robert cleared his throat. "We thought she was going through typical teenage phases. They told us she was rebellious, difficult. And you believed them without asking me." I spoke up for the first time. "I saw you at Thanksgiving. I barely had any food on my plate because they said I needed to earn seconds. You saw that and said nothing." The memory had surfaced in therapy. "Thanksgiving?" Just a month before the blizzard incident. I'd been allowed to attend family dinner, but subjected to humiliating restrictions. Brittany had been served generous portions while I received minimal food. Grandma Carol had noticed my empty plate and asked if I was feeling well. I'd said I was fine because what else could I say with my parents watching? "I'm so sorry." Grandma Carol reached for me, but I stepped back. "Chloe, please. You're still our granddaughter. We want to help." Where was that help when I needed it? The words came out harder than I'd intended. Where were you when I was sleeping in an unheated basement? When I was locked outside in a blizzard? You chose to believe their lies because it was easier than confronting the truth. They had no answer to that. Uncle David guided me away, leaving my grandparents standing in the courthouse. I felt guilty for my harshness, then angry at myself for feeling guilty. They failed me, too, in quieter but still significant ways. The formal sentencing happened in late spring. I attended, sitting in the front row beside Uncle David. My parents entered in prison uniforms, looking older and grayer than I remembered. Brittany sat separately, her pregnancy now obvious at 7 months. Judge Reynolds' statement lasted 20 minutes, detailing the severity of the crime, the vulnerability of the victim, the callous disregard for human life. She noted that the blizzard had been forecast days in advance, meaning my parents had known exactly what conditions they were sending me into. She mentioned my age, my helplessness, the physical evidence of how close I'd come to dying. The courtroom had filled with people I had never expected to see. Teachers from my school sat in the gallery, including Ms. Davies, who'd encouraged my writing. Several neighbors testified earlier about the changes they'd noticed and how my parents treated me versus Brittany. Even the paramedic who'd treated me that night attended, his presence a quiet reminder of how critical my condition had been. Before the judge announced the sentences, the prosecution presented their final evidence summary. They displayed photographs on a large screen, the soaked sleeping bag, the oak tree I'd huddled under, the locked deadbolt, my frostbitten feet in the hospital. The courtroom fell silent as images of my near-death experience played out in clinical detail. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Prosecutor Sterling, addressed the court with controlled fury. "Your Honor, this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. The defendants had multiple opportunities to prevent this tragedy. They made deliberate choices repeatedly over the course of 2 days. They watched their minor child suffer and made the conscious decision to continue that suffering." She pulled up text messages between my parents, recovered from their phones. Messages sent while I was outside freezing. My mother had texted my father, "She's being dramatic as usual. A night outside will teach her gratitude." My father had responded, "Good. Brittany needs peace and quiet. The girl will survive one cold night." Those messages had been sent on the first night, around 9 p.m., when my body temperature was already dropping into dangerous territory. Prosecutor Sterling then showed messages from the second day. My mother to my father, "She's still outside. Should we let her in?" My father's response, "Let her think about her attitude a while longer. Check on her this afternoon." That check never happened. Uncle David had arrived before they'd gotten around to it. The messages demonstrated not just negligence, but active, ongoing decision-making to keep me in danger. The defense had no counter to that evidence. How could they explain away written proof of their client's indifference? My father's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Jenkins, attempted to argue for leniency based on my father's lack of criminal history and his role as a provider. My client made a terrible error in judgment during a stressful family situation. He's a decorated veteran who served his country. A man who worked 2 jobs to support his family. This incident, while serious, represents a single aberration in an otherwise law-abiding life. Prosecutor Sterling stood immediately. "Your Honor, the defendant's service and employment history don't mitigate the fact that he locked his 14-year-old daughter outside during a blizzard with inadequate protection, then ignored her for 2 days. His text messages show this wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. He's a danger to children, including any future grandchildren he might have contact with. My mother's attorney, a younger woman named Ms. Green, tried a different approach. She painted my mother as someone under psychological duress from Brittany's situation, someone who had been manipulated by her husband into going along with his decisions. Mrs. Thompson was herself a victim of her husband's controlling behavior. She expressed doubts, as shown in her text message, asking if they should let Chloe inside. She wanted to help, but felt powerless. The prosecution dismantled this immediately by showing my mother's response to her own question. After asking if they should let me in, she'd added, "Though I suppose another few hours won't hurt." Ashley finally got a good night's sleep. Another few hours. I remembered those hours. The second morning, my third day outside, when I'd stopped being able to feel my extremities, when coherent thought had become nearly impossible. My mother had casually decided I could endure another few hours so my adult sister could sleep comfortably. Judge Reynolds, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, listened to all arguments with an impassive expression. When both sides finished, she removed her glasses and looked directly at my parents. "I've presided over many difficult cases in my career," she began. "Cases involving violence, theft, fraud, but few have disturbed me as deeply as this one. You didn't harm your daughter in a moment of rage or passion. You didn't make a split-second decision with unintended consequences. You methodically, over multiple days, subjected a child, your child, to life-threatening conditions while you remained warm and safe inside your home." She paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom. My parents both stared at the table in front of them, unable to meet her gaze. "The evidence shows you prioritized your adult daughter's comfort over your minor daughter's survival. You had numerous opportunities to prevent harm. The weather forecast was clear. The temperature was documented. Your daughter's inadequate protection was obvious, yet you chose repeatedly and deliberately to leave her in danger." The judge shuffled through papers on her bench. "The court has reviewed the medical records, the testimony from medical professionals about how close Chloe came to perishing. For more hours, possibly less. That's how near you came to being charged with manslaughter instead of endangerment." My hands gripped Uncle David's arm. He covered my hand with his, steady and grounding. "Your actions have permanently impacted your daughter's life. She's lost toes. She requires ongoing medical care. She suffers from trauma that will take years to address. And perhaps most damaging, you've destroyed any possibility of a healthy family relationship. You've taught her that the people who should protect her are the ones she needs protection from." Judge Reynolds put her glasses back on and picked up her sentencing document. "The court finds these crimes were committed with extreme indifference to human life against a particularly vulnerable victim over an extended period. The aggravating factors far outweigh any mitigating circumstances. My father received 9 years. My mother received 7. Brittany received 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent note on her child services record. All 3 were ordered to have no contact with me until I turned 18, and only then if I chose to initiate it. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood on shaking legs. I'd prepared remarks with my therapist, but they disappeared when I faced my parents directly. "You were supposed to protect me," my voice echoed in the quiet courtroom. "That's what parents do. They keep their children safe. Instead, you decided I didn't matter. You put me outside to perish because my pregnant adult sister wanted my bedroom." My mother started crying. I ignored her. "I still have nightmares about the cold, about watching you eat dinner while I froze, about how you saw me at the door the next morning and turned away." I gripped the podium to steady myself. "You didn't forget about me. You chose this, and I'll never understand how you could choose that." Brittany stared at her hands, her face flushed. My father looked at the ceiling. My mother kept crying, her lawyer offering tissues. "The judge already decided your punishment. I just wanted you to hear this from me. I'm glad Uncle David found me. I'm glad you're going to prison." And I hope you spend every single day thinking about what you did and why your daughter will never forgive you." The courtroom remained silent after I finished. I returned to my seat, my hands trembling. Uncle David squeezed my shoulder gently. The judge concluded the proceedings. Officers led my parents away through separate doors. Brittany left through the main entrance, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Uncle David and I waited until the crowd dispersed before leaving through a side exit. Life moved forward in strange ways. Uncle David officially adopted me that summer. I started therapy twice a week, working through complex trauma and trust issues. The physical damage healed. I lost 2 toes on my left foot, and my hands remained sensitive to cold. But overall, I recovered well. School proved harder. Everyone knew my story. Some people treated me like glass, afraid to mention winter or families or anything that might trigger me. Others wanted dramatic details I wouldn't share. Eventually, I found my rhythm again. Discovered which friends were genuine and which just wanted proximity to tragedy. Brittany's baby was born in July, a healthy girl she named Emma. I knew this only because it made local news, baby born to woman convicted in sister's endangerment case. The child was placed with adoptive parents before leaving the hospital. Brittany posted one message on social media about the adoption, claiming she'd made the selfless choice to give her daughter a better life. The comment section destroyed that narrative immediately. My parents sent letters from prison that I refused to read. Uncle David kept them in a file, saying I might want them someday. I doubted it. What could they possibly say that would matter? Sorry wouldn't restore the toes I'd lost. Sorry wouldn't erase the nightmares or the panic attacks I sometimes had in winter. Sorry wouldn't change the fact that they'd been willing to let me die. The first anniversary of that December night arrived with fresh snow. I woke up sweating despite the cold, my heart racing from a nightmare. Uncle David found me in the kitchen at 3 a.m, making tea with shaking hands. Rough night? He sat across from me at the table. I dreamed I was back under the tree, but this time nobody came. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. In the dream, I just fell asleep in the snow and didn't wake up. But you did wake up. You survived, he spoke quietly. What your parents did was monstrous, Chloe. But you're still here. You're safe now. Safe? The words still felt foreign sometimes. Uncle David had turned his entire life upside down to give me stability, rearranging his work schedule, turning his home office into my bedroom, attending every therapy appointment and school meeting. He'd chosen to protect me when my own parents had chosen the opposite. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. For everything. For finding me. For keeping me. Your family, his voice held absolute certainty. That's not conditional. Not based on convenience or what room you sleep in. You're my family, and I'll always protect you. I believed him, not because he'd said it, but because he'd proven it. He'd driven through a blizzard because a friend's mother expressed concern. He'd searched until he found me. He called for help and helped me through the worst moments. He'd stepped up without hesitation. That's what family actually meant. Not the people who shared your blood and then abandoned you to freeze, but the person who showed up and refused to leave. The snow continued falling outside, peaceful and quiet. I watched it accumulate on the windowsill. No longer terrified. Just cold, just winter, just weather I could choose to experience from inside a warm, safe home. My phone buzzed with a message from my therapist confirming our appointment later that week. I had somewhere to go, someone who listened, resources to help me process everything that had happened. Uncle David had ensured I had support systems, stability, a future. Meanwhile, my parents sat in prison cells, my father serving 9 years, and my mother 7. Brittany lived in a tiny apartment across town, working a minimum wage job and seeing a court-ordered counselor. Emma, the niece I'd never meet, was growing up with parents who'd chosen her intentionally, who would welcome her into a home where she'd be valued and safe. Different outcomes for different choices. My parents had chosen their pregnant adult daughter's comfort over their minor child's survival. They'd chosen to lock me outside in deadly conditions rather than have an uncomfortable conversation with Brittany about temporary inconvenience. They'd chosen repeatedly and deliberately, and now they were living with those consequences. I chose differently. Chose therapy over bitterness. Chose to build a life with Uncle David rather than let trauma define me. Chose to move forward instead of staying frozen in that December night. Outside, the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. I finished my tea, rinsed the mug, and went back to bed. Tomorrow, I'd go to school, see my friends, come home to Uncle David, and a dinner we'd make together. Normal things. Safe things. The life I deserved all along. It's strange, isn't it, how sometimes the people who save you are the ones you least expect.